So I think this might have become one of my favourite photos of Lily and Jack. Just that look on Lily's face, and Jack actually looks kind of happy there. I guess, he's heading off to school, he's getting away from the house. Now, before I jump into this video, I need to offer an apology and a thank you. So, in StreamYard yesterday when I was doing my live stream, and this happened in terms of super chats as well with my other live stream, somebody bought some memberships, like did a membership donation thing, and I didn't see that. I didn't see who did it. I didn't see how many memberships it was. So to whoever that person is, thank you very, very much. That was very kind of you, and I very much appreciate your support of my channel. And to the people who were gifted those memberships, welcome to membership. Now, I do feel like I'm chasing my tail a little bit this week, but I do anticipate that I will be doing another live stream Monday morning for me, which would be Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening for people in Canada and the United States. I will endeavour to be better organised and get the notification up before I go to bed so that you would get it the morning of that day. Now, I do want to thank everyone who's come in here to watch my video, because I know that right now there's a lot of other things going on that are drawing people's attention, especially the Nancy Guthrie case. So I am incredibly grateful that you thought I was worth spending your time on. On that note, I'm going to ask you to hit that like button at the start if you are someone who is a regular on my channel, because with all the other things that are going on, it is affecting my views. So right now, any help getting my videos seen is very much appreciated. So this is actually my third video looking at that interview that Daniel just recently did at the beginning of January. I must admit I'm making slow progress with it, but that's because there is so much going on in this interview that I don't want to miss anything important. So I finished off yesterday's video with that whopping great lie of his, where he said, I have nothing to do with the disappearance because they didn't ask any questions on that. Totally illogical, but also a whopping great lie, because if you watched yesterday's video or if you saw the YouTube short that I put out this morning, he actually told the media back on, I think it was the 12th of June, that one of the questions they had asked him was, were you involved in the disappearance of Lily and Jack? So the guy's got a really short memory, but it just highlights how much of a liar he is. Just on an aside before I do jump into that, my YouTube short, a few people have commented to me that YouTube won't let them comment on there, even though they can see other people have commented. That's happened to me before. I don't know why it does it, and I don't really know what the answer is to fix that. So if you're encountering that problem, maybe at least hit the like button. That said, if you do have a comment that you want to share, then there's a few options as well. So you can go to my community page, and I've got to learn to actually go in and see, because for some reason YouTube Studio doesn't actually tell me when people have made comments there. But if you've got something you want to share, you can always go into my community page and create a post there. Or if you're wanting to specifically comment on that YouTube short, it's also on TikTok. So I think the link for my TikTok account is in this video in the description. If it's not, I will make sure I add it. So if you did want to go over, for the most part, what I put on TikTok is pretty much the same as what I put on here. But if you did really wanted to comment on that video, the little short, then you can find it on TikTok also. Anyway, I think that's more than enough yabbering, so let's just jump into this video.
And so you mentioned that in the polygraph, they didn't ask you about the disappearance and whether you had anything to do with it. but I'm going to ask. Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Jack and Lily?
No.
Did you kill them?
No.
Okay, so first of all, he's going to snap that damn tendon if he grips his hands any tighter. Note even his knuckles are white. This is not someone who is calm about being asked if they were responsible for the disappearance of Jack and Lily or if they killed Jack and Lily. Now, to me, this suggests someone who is very quick to anger, who is very quick to lash out, and that's a really frightening thought. It is, in my opinion, indicative of someone who is not very good at controlling their temper. So he was gripping pretty tightly while she was asking those questions, but when he said no, he gripped even tighter, both times. Now, I zoomed in on that clip because what was going on with his lizard lips was quite interesting. You've seen the usual lizard lips where the tongue just shoots out, straight out in front and back in again. But we saw a variation there. So she says to him, so you mentioned that in the polygraph they didn't ask you about the disappearance. And as she's saying polygraph, you get the lizard lips, but they come out the corner of the mouth. The tongue comes out the corner of the mouth. And it actually stays there for longer than his usual zipping it out and then back in again. I've mentioned this several times in the past, but when you see any sort of asymmetry in someone's facial expressions, most of the time that is showing contempt. So it seems really telling that as she mentions polygraph, we get that crooked lizard lips. I don't know whether the contempt is directed at her or if it's directed at the RCMP, but obviously it has something to do with the topic of the polygraph exam. Is it because she is coming at him and asking him a curly question, or is it because there's some sort of issue there in relation to the polygraph exam, something that is causing contempt on his part? Of course, it could also be contempt over the fact that people are still bringing up that polygraph exam, even though he's been telling everyone for months that he passed, and even though he's been pushing the notion that the documents say that he passed, despite the fact that there's redactions, so we don't know the full story there. So it could be that he is feeling somewhat resentful of her digging into the polygraph exam when he's just said, hey, look, it showed I was truthful. But I think it's possible that Daniel has just demonstrated an ability to multitask right then and there with that crooked lizard lips. Because we know, anytime we see those lizard lips, we know there is a lie coming or he's just done a lie. So the fact that they shoot out and will actually come out and linger while she's saying polygraph certainly suggests that he has lied in relation to the polygraph, but at the same time he's managing to show contempt in relation to something to do with the polygraph. It's probably got a lot of levels of contempt there in terms of people still questioning, in terms of her questioning. And of course, for all we know, it could also be contempt towards whoever administered the polygraph. Because while he wants us all to believe that it was all smelling roses and, happy joy, and let's skip out the door together, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some things that came up in that polygraph exam that he's now feeling a bit resentful towards. And when you look at the timing of it, it was probably a turning point for him also when he suddenly started to realise that actually RCMP aren't his biggest fan club. Meanwhile, I really don't think he was remotely prepared for her to fire those questions at her. Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Jack and Lily? Did you kill them? And in that first part where she has mentioned, look, you were saying that they didn't ask you about the disappearance, and then starts asking, did you have anything to do with the disappearance? When she hits you see his regular lizard lips. And he does do them at his usual speed, like that really super fast zipping out and in again, which is the reason why I nicknamed them that in the first place, because it's quick. If you blink, you miss it. So essentially, he's anticipated the rest of that question based on the context of what she's saying there, and he's signalled with his lizard lips that the next thing that comes out of his mouth is going to be a lie. And he says, no. But honestly, there is so much going on here. So another one of Daniel's baseline behaviours that has become really apparent over the last couple of interviews, in fact going back to the turkey guy, is he closes his eyes when he's being asked something that he doesn't want to answer, when he is being asked something that he's going to give a lie about as a response. So even before she gets to the point of the did you have anything to do with the disappearance, you see him close his eyes when she says, I'm going to ask. It's almost like he's responding out loud saying, well, I'm going to lie to you. I'm not going to give you the truthful answer here. So this is something to watch out for when you are watching Daniel in interviews. You see him blink a lot. You get the rapid blink rate when things are stressing him out. But you also see him close his eyes on really, really significant words, significant moments. I can't help wondering if Janie was one of those mothers that would say, now look me in the eyes and tell me that again, so that I know, so I can tell if you are telling the truth. Because that's the best way to psych out any child when you know they are lying. I mean, I think it would be fair to say, based on his personality, that even as a child he was probably a whopping great liar. Now, it seems like a bit of a departure from Daniel to simply give a straight-out no answer without elaborating, trying to over-explain like he normally does. But there's two things going on, I think. First of all, like I said, this guy adapts. I think he watches a lot of content, and even comments that he's made in interviews shows that he watches a lot of content, and he adapts his behaviours based on what content creators are saying. Like I was saying in, I think, yesterday's video, the helicopter hands are such a classic example, or the helicopter arms, because the first interviews that he was doing, he was not moving his arms at all. And a lot of content creators commented on that because it just seemed unnatural. So then all of a sudden we have these helicopter arms happening in an interview. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to launch off into space any minute. And a lot of people commented on that because it was just so unnatural. So he's been adapting his behaviour because after that, he stopped doing it again. So I do think that at least part of what's going on here is a situation where he's heard people talking about him over-explaining things, and he's trying to go the other way, but it just sounds unnatural. I think the other reason it sounds odd is because of how clipped it is. Both times when he says no, he pretty much just spits it out, clips it off really quickly. Done and dusted. And I think it's a case of he wants to move on. But what you see too is more of his body language giving him away and showing his lies. So first up, she asks him about, did you have anything to do with the disappearance? And he's shaking his head, spits out the no, but then you get this minuscule, like a micro gesture, yet again, nod. And at the same time, he's closing his eyes. And of course, like I said, you also see those hands gripping really tightly. Now, we know Daniel has this need to control everything. So normally in these interviews, he pays a lot of attention to the interviewer, whether it is just keeping an eye on them in terms of judging how they are responding, which is something you see quite often in his early interviews. As he finishes saying something, he looks up to check basically and see if they just bought his story. But he definitely has this need to control, which for someone who has a need to control, that means basically keeping an eye on your audience, judging their reactions so that you know if or when you need to change your story. But when she is asking him if he had anything to do with the disappearance, he's doing his best to avoid eye contact. He's actually looking down and he's looking away to the right. And this is something that is so different from what we would normally see from him that to me it really stands out. The evasion, the wanting to not look at her face, presumably it's that psychological thing of you think if you're not looking at them, they're probably not looking at you, so they're not going to read anything in your body language that's going to give you away. And yeah, it usually is something that you see with someone who has a guilty conscience. But with Daniel, up until now, he's just had this arrogant confidence about him where he's basically, I think, believed that everyone was buying into his stories. He's believed that people thought he was a good guy. And I think at the time that he did this interview, that whatever was going on at that point in time with the RCMP, he was starting to feel less confident about being Daniel the hero. Was there something that made him realise that those charges were just about to come down and hit him in the face? Was there something really different with his relationship with the RCMP that he picked up on? I just think seeing that difference with him being the guy who would normally keep a real close eye on the person he's talking to, display this sort of confidence like, hey, I'm a good guy, I believe that you believe my lies, all that sort of stuff. I mean, you have to agree, there is a huge difference in his demeanour when we look at this interview. So, certainly, something has shifted. Maybe a loss of confidence, maybe a realisation that maybe the writing is on the wall. I'm not sure. But it's certainly very different from what we saw at the beginning of this case. But at the same time, I don't think he's completely beaten down. I think there's still a lot of fight in this guy. Because when she asks him, did you kill them? He closes his eyes on kill, which again to me says that he probably did. Because quite often he closes his eyes when he's trying to hide the truth from someone. It's always on things that are significant in what is being said. But then, after doing that, what he actually does, you still get the clipped no, but he tilts his head up a bit. So you see the head tilt back a bit and the chin tilt up a little bit. And it's actually a bit of a sideways way that he does it, it appears to me. And that gesture right there is where that comment comes from that you hear people say when they say, oh, that person looks down their nose at this other person. Because it is a physical gesture. It is you establishing that you are more important than the other person because you're putting yourself higher up. You are looking down on them. And I think it's fair to say that the look that he was giving her at that time, it was not a friendly look. And I mean, the fact that he's got that slight tilt of the head, that's him showing contempt for her. He's showing contempt because she actually asked him if he had killed the children. He clearly did not like that at all. And you'll note with both those questions, there's no sarcasm, there's no attempt to laugh it off. There's no attempt to treat it as something that is utterly absurd. It's just this clipped no and body language that screams that this guy is not happy.
What do you think happened to them?
At this point, I'm completely just not sure. I mean, I've thrown speculation out in the past and, narratives that I think, or theories that, what I think may have happened. But at this point, I have to just go with what the RCMP say, because they have so much information, they have more resources, and they're the ones that are fully invested in this case. They have the, intellect and professional training to do what they do.
So first of all, you notice that now that they have moved away from that slightly frightening territory for Daniel, he's once again looking at her, trying to gauge her reaction. He thinks this is a really good story that he's spinning right now. He thinks it sounds spot on, and you can tell that because of the number of times he's looking up and checking and trying to read her to make sure that she is buying this story. But this is a major about face for Daniel. He has been trying to lay this on Malaya for the last 9 months, or 8 months by the time he did this interview, and all of a sudden he's not going there. I would really love to know what was going on behind the scenes at this point in time, because we are seeing definitely a huge contrast in Daniel's behaviour, in his attitude. And I know I've already said this, but I think that what is going on here is that RCMP have got everything they need from him now. They don't need him to think that he's part of the investigation. They don't need him to think that they're buddy-buddy with him. I think they've got all the framework of the investigation, and now they're just filling in the gaps. So they don't need to play nice cop with him anymore. And I think that's why we are seeing this change. I think he is starting to realise the writing is on the wall. But I also can't help thinking that he's been given some sort of warning about the allegations that he's been making against Malaya, because this is a huge turnaround. Now, he starts out by saying, at this point, I'm completely just not sure. And he's shaking his head while he's saying that. He's basically telling us straight up that he knows exactly what happened. And it's this complete utter word salad. He's thrown in words that don't really belong there, but he's got all these extra words in there anyway. Saying, I'm completely just not sure. But completely and not sure don't fit together in an argument, because not sure is not an absolute. That means you might have some ideas, but you're not entirely certain. But when you say something is completely, that means you are talking in absolute terms. Now, obviously, completely is also another persuasive device. And that's what he's trying to do here. He's not thinking about the context. He's not thinking about the fact that completely and not sure don't go together, because not sure is not an absolute. He's using completely because he wants to sound like he's being truthful, like he's being honest here. But instead it has the opposite effect, because it shows that this is completely contrived. Now, it seems like he's not had a chance to practice this narrative. He hasn't even figured it out in his head, because you're getting a lot of fillers here. So you get a lot of So he's saying, I've thrown speculation out in the past, and narratives or theories that everything's But honestly, the amount of leakage from this guy is phenomenal. He starts by saying he's thrown speculation out in the past and says, narratives. Well, speculation and narratives are two different things. And of course, narratives are basically made-up stories, pretty much. And he realises it. He realises it because we've all said it so many times about the things that him and Malaya have said aren't just narratives, they are scripted. So then he tries to correct himself and change it to theories. So he's trying out words, basically. Starts with speculation, goes to narratives, goes to theories. Well, speculation and theories are far closer than narrative is to either. But none of that is quite what he was doing. Because essentially he was gaslighting Malaya, and he was trying to make sure that she was the one that got brought down for all this. But he's downplaying what he's been doing over the last 8-9 months. Because he's been putting out stories that have deliberately made people think, wow, yeah, Malaya must have done it. You know, well, I'm the one that's still here searching for the children. And the contrived statements that were meant to lead the listener down a particular route, saying that Cindy got there way faster than she should have been able to, given when the children were reported missing. The story of the hole in the garbage bag, the bag that was double bagged with the blanket in the very bottom. So someone had to have intentionally gone in there and pulled the bit of blanket out. And the comments that he made to the turkey guy, like when he said that him and Malaya woke up at the same time, and Malaya immediately said, I don't hear the children. And he's like, well, that's weird, because you would think he would actually listen for a while first instead of just waking up and blurting it out. Like, that was intended to make sure the audience thought, wow, yeah, she's guilty. And then he talks about getting up, going straight to the kitchen. And it was funny because Malaya didn't even look in their rooms. There was never any speculation from Daniel. There were never any theories. It was always these little nuggets of information that he'd made up that were deliberately intended to make his audience think, wow, yeah, gosh, Malaya is so guilty. And not just trying to make it look like Malaya is guilty, but also trying to implicate her family members. And then you get this statement about the RCMP. Just wow. This is his next way of trying to act innocent. Hey, look at me. I'm going to talk up the RCMP and say how well they're going with their investigation. I'm going to talk them up and say how intelligent they are and how they're just so well equipped and all this sort of stuff. Like, all of a sudden, after 8 months of pushing people to accuse Malaya, not doing it himself, but making sure that he's manipulating as many people as possible so that they will accuse Malaya, now he's turning around and saying, I have to just go with what the RCMP say because they have so much information. He's bending over backwards here to use this to try and convince his audience that he's innocent. They have more resources. What we're supposed to conclude from that is that, well, he's been doing his best to do his own investigation, but he's just going to have to hand it all over to the RCMP because they're the ones with all the resources, not him. So he's just going to have to let them lead the way. But then the next thing he says, major leakage. He puts his foot in it, and I don't think he even realised that he did. He said, they're the ones that are fully invested in this case. So he's just started by inferring that he's been doing his own investigation and saying that he's got to go with what they say because they've got so much information and they have more resources. The more resources is meant to be him expecting us to believe that he's got some resources that he was using to do his own investigation, but, you know, the RCMP have got more resources, so he's just going to let them do the case. He's going to step back. So it's pretty clear that he's talking about himself here in terms of he sees himself as a private investigator, but he's going to just, step back now. And that's why when he says, and they're the ones that are fully invested in this case, that's major leakage. Because he's saying the RCMP, they're the ones, they've got more resources, and they're the ones that are fully invested. When you say they're the ones, that's like they're the ones out of this person and this person. And the only people he's established here in this narrative is himself and the RCMP. So he's basically said he's not invested in finding Lily and Jack. He's not invested in this case. The RCMP, they're the ones that are invested in this case. He's not. He doesn't give a damn. And of course, we know that he probably just really doesn't want them to be found. He really doesn't want the case to be properly resolved. He would like it to become a cold case. And this one statement, they're the ones that are fully invested, that shows you just what he thought about Lily and Jack. Even if he was completely innocent in this, even if this was truthful what he's saying here, he would still be saying, I'm not invested in this case. Because that's what that statement says. I'm not fully invested in this case. For an innocent person to say that, that would be a red flag. You would say, why are you not fully invested in this case? These were your partner's children. Sorry, I had to record that because that was just too cute. Amira is lying in massive dog bed that I bought for Taka, which she's taken for herself, and Taka has to try and sleep on, or half sleep, on a chihuahua-sized bed. But that was Derpy having one of those yippy dreams. I don't know what she was chasing in her dream, but hopefully she caught it. So, this guy lived with those kids for 3 years. He should be heavily invested. So saying they're the ones that are fully invested in this case is really a huge red flag. That is him showing that he's guilty, essentially. Because no innocent person is going to say that, yeah, the RCMP, they're the ones that are heavily invested in this case. With the unspoken thing being they're heavily invested, not me. There's no way that an innocent person who has lived with 2 children for 3 years who are subsequently missing is going to suggest that anybody else could possibly be more invested than them, unless they are referring to probably the mother of the children or the father of the children had he been more closely connected with the children. Maybe you would talk about the grandparents being maybe possibly more heavily invested because they are blood relatives. But he is saying that these strangers who've never met Lily and Jack are far more invested in the case than he is. But can we accept this, what this is? This whole statement is a false compliment. It's that situation where you know it is expected of you to say positive things about somebody, but you would just like to say that you really hate that person and you think they're a jerk. But that is not what is expected of you at that point in time. So instead, you gush about that person. You don't just do the somewhat neutral, like, yeah, they do a good job of what they're doing. But you gush, they are the best investigator that I've ever heard of. Which is exactly what he's doing here. So he's showing us that he has actually become quite resentful towards the RCMP. I think that they are putting pressure on him, touch wood. Because he talks about, they have the intellect and professional training to do what they do. This is in the context of him saying that he's essentially got to just go with what the RCMP say. So these statements that he's making, they have more resources, they're more invested, they're smarter. He would never normally say that about them if he actually meant it. So this shows us that he has actually become quite negative towards the RCMP. They're not playing the friendship game anymore, and he's realising that, and he's resenting whatever it is that they have been doing in the last month or so.
It's been 8 months, and I know a lot of people think that, the kids are not alive anymore, but I hold out hope 100%. I'll always hold out hope every day because there's no reason not to.
I would definitely have to replay that clip for you after I discuss it because there's a lot happening there. Again, we're getting quite a lot of fillers in his speech. So it's been 8 months, and I know a lot of people think, the kids are not alive anymore. First of all, none of that really fits together. I know you know. The is just a filler. But it shows you that there's no meaning in this for him. He's just saying this because this is what he thinks he has to say. But honestly, he's giving himself away so much here. So as he's saying the kids are not alive anymore, he's nodding in agreement. Yeah, they're not alive anymore. And you're getting that increased blink rate at the same time. But he's actually doing a major juggling act here. And what do I mean by that? Well, he comes out with this. His favourite thing at the moment is 100%. He thinks that's going to convince people. I don't know if that's because he's heard everyone making fun of Durwood with his 1000% ironclad, and he thinks that saying 100% for everything is going to be persuasive. It is not necessary. It is over-attempting, again, to be persuasive. But the big tell here is he's actually doing a fake nod. Like, oh my gosh. This guy clearly studies what YouTubers are saying in terms of his body language. Because while he is saying that I hold out hope 100%, he's doing this nod. Now, it seems over-exaggerated, and you might have been looking at it thinking it just doesn't look natural. You may have picked why it didn't look natural, you may not have. Aside from it being a very over-exaggerated nod, it isn't in alignment with his speech. He keeps nodding after he finishes talking. When someone's body language isn't synchronised with their speech, straight up, it's fake. But what makes it so amusing is that his brain goes into system override. So he's doing this fake nod, and he keeps nodding after he stops talking. But then he's saying, I'll always hold out hope every day because there's no reason not to. And he's shaking his head the whole way through. His brain's just gone, right, I'm taking control here because you're just lying flat out, so I'm just going to just tell people what the real story is. And he's back in familiar territory. So we're seeing more of his previous body language things. So he gets to the end of the statement, and again he's looking at the interviewer for confirmation that she's buying his story. And he's also switched back into more formal speech, the sort of language that you would expect in a written piece of work as opposed to in just everyday verbal language. So he says that he's holding out hope. I would expect to see that in a written statement, in a written letter, not hear that coming out as speech. I would expect to hear something way less formal like, I'm just trying to stay hopeful. I'm trying to hold on to just a little bit of hope. But when you say that you are holding out hope, how often do you hear someone say that? On a normal day, if someone was saying they were hopeful about something, you're not going to hear them say, I'm holding out hope. You might hear it in a media report when a reporter is doing a narrative alongside an interview. So the reporter might be saying, and the stepfather says that he's holding out hope that the children will be found. And then they play a bit of audio from him. But for him to say it himself, it's not natural language. It just shows you this is just all BS. And you get him saying that I'll always hold out hope every day. Well, you don't need to say every day if you're saying you always will hold out hope. So again, he's overdoing it. He's overselling it. Contextually, always and every day just don't fit together in that sentence. Holding out hope is a continuous thing. So every day is utterly, utterly redundant. It doesn't belong there in that sentence. I mean, I guess you could say, I always drink coffee every day. Because the always is you're establishing that every day, without fail, you drink coffee. But not when you're talking about this kind of thing. I'll always hold out hope every day. And seriously, because there's no reason not to. He's essentially said that he's thrown away his theory that Malaya had someone take the children away and hide them. So he's essentially saying he's thrown away this abduction theory. He's said multiple times in the past that he doesn't believe the children wandered off into the woods. So to say that there's no reason not to hold out hope every day, that's just illogical. But of course he has to say that because if he can convince people that the children are still alive, then he couldn't possibly be guilty. He's got the same mindset as Durwood. If he's guilty, then the children are not alive. But if the children are alive, he can't be guilty. He knows he's guilty, he knows the children aren't alive, so he has to sell this idea that they could still be alive somewhere. But you will notice that when he's saying there's no reason not to, he's shaking his head. It seems like in his mind he thought that so long as he could nod vigorously on holding out hope 100%, that would convince people, and then he's stopped worrying about his body language and his brain's taken over and said, I'll tell the story now, thank you. But in terms of what he's saying, he's back into familiar territory. And he's feeling a little bit more confident. And we know this because just for a very brief moment, you see a hint of duper's delight after he says, every day. He's back into his usual narrative. This whole saying the things that he thinks people want to hear. I'm still searching. I will always fight for Lily and Jack for the rest of my life. These fake affirmations that he thinks make him look like the good guy. So I'll play that clip again for you so you can see exactly what I'm talking about.
It's been 8 months, and I know a lot of people think that, the kids are not alive anymore, but I hold out hope. 100%. I'll always hold out hope every day because there's no reason not to.
Now, I know it's been a while since I've done a longer video, but I'm going to wrap it up here. We get a change of topic again, and I know it's only been 45 minutes, but to be quite honest, if you listen to yesterday's video, you will know that we had nighttime roadworks here last night. They started after dinner, and they kept going until 6 a.m. this morning. So I've had very, very little sleep. And of course, that combined with a day full of interruptions and distractions, I just feel like I'm just not getting anywhere right now. So I'm going to finish it here and come back to this again tomorrow. So on that note, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. I would love to try and reach 7,000 subscribers. I know a lot of bigger channels just think that's hilarious probably, but for me, that's a milestone I would like to reach. Also, please hit the like button. That gets these videos out there into the algorithm. And also, please leave a comment below. I love reading your comments. I don't always get the time to respond, but I do read all of them, and I appreciate the time that you put into sharing your thoughts. So on that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.